Hello my friends, welcome to another tutorial at the Lulu Blue Studio. I'm your host, my name is Luisa. Today we're going to paint this loose style floral composition, and I'm going to guide you through the process of painting first this main flower, this hero flower, this peony, and then all the other roses and other filling flowers and loose style leaves. I hope you're going to have fun and you're going to learn something from this painting. Let's start painting together. So we start painting this flower piece starting from the hero flower in the center of the composition, and I'm mixing a little bit of Quinacridone Magenta and yellow ochre. And using my filbert brush, I'm creating the first peony in the center using mainly the belly and the side of my brush. I am using the belly of my brush when I want to create thick petals and the side of my brush when I want to create thinner petals. I mix onto my palette a little bit of ink, pink ink, and I add this pink ink mainly in the central petals of this peony to give more definition of these petals compared to the others. Since this pink peony in the center has a lot of petals, I am creating an effect of highlighting the different petals, playing with the different color values of pink and adding a little bit of yellow ochre. I switch now to a round brush in size 12 and I mix a little bit of transparent orange and yellow ochre to start to create the first rows of this flower composition. I start from the center and I create the center with a very concentrated amount of pigment, and I'm using mainly the tip of this round brush and the belly of the brush when instead I wanted to create thicker petals. I also add a mixture of Scarlet Red to add to the center of this orange rose to create a little bit more definition to the center and to create a little bit of continuity into the petals too. I love to see how the red blends into the transparent orange, and therefore that's the reason why I've decided to use these two colors together. I've decided to create other two roses on the right side of the main hero flower, the peony, and in this case I created the first rose in red and the second rose in yellow. The way I create the rose is always starting from the center of this flower and then adding petals using the belly of this round brush and adding more pressure to create thicker brush strokes that are indication of the petals I'm creating. I then like to go back to the center of these flowers and add a little bit of more concentrated pigment. It can be the same sort of pigment or a different pigment like I did with the first rose. At this point, I've decided to start to create other filling flowers with a flat brush. You can find all the details of the pigment that I'm using, the paints and also the brushes I'm using in the description below. In this case, I'm using this flat brush to start to create some sorts of flowers similar to daisies, where I am trying to highlight first the petals that are leading all to the same center that I'm going to create in a second moment. In this case, I'm playing with the value, the color value of this blue, this is Cobalt Blue, where some petals are created with a more concentrated amount of pigment and some other petals are created with just a little amount of pigment and a higher concentration of water. And this is in fact one of the tips that I would like you to remember when you play with watercolors, and in fact it is to remember to play with the different color values for entire flowers or for just a few petals of your flowers. This means that a few petals or entire flowers can have a higher concentration of pigment compared to others, and this will give the impression that your whole composition is going to be a little bit more realistic. At this point, I'm using the side of my flat brush to create very little brush strokes that imitate some flowers, some wild flowers that start from the center where the peony is located and go towards the sides of my paper. I'm using mainly a mixture of Cobalt Violet with a little bit of Cobalt Blue, and I am remembering to change the color value of this pigment on my brush. It's at this point that I've decided to add a little bit of stems in the middle part of the flowers I've created to start to give to this composition a better and more realistic look. So I'm using the tip of this round brush. I'm not adding too much pressure onto the brush and onto the paper, and I'm just sort of connecting these little dots that I've created for these filling flowers. With the same brush, I also start to create bigger leaves, and I use mainly a mixture of Sap Green and Cobalt Green. In this case, these brush strokes are not very concentrated. It means that the pigment on my brush is not very concentrated and there is a higher concentration of water. And this is just the very first layer of leaves, let's say, that I'm creating. These leaves are creating just by touching the paper with the belly of my brush, and I'm not adding too much pressure and I'm not creating these leaves too big because I want this composition to be just focused on these flowers I created in the center, and I don't want the leaves to be too heavy. So these leaves are going to be quite small and just a quick brush strokes of this round brush. Mainly I'm using the side and the belly of this brush to create these leaves, and the more I create these leaves, the more I start to add a little bit of more concentrated pigment. I use mainly a mixture of Sap Green, Cobalt Green, but I also like to add some Azomethine Green Yellow, that is a sort of green that leads more towards the yellow side to bring a little bit more lightness to this whole composition. When you create a composition that is quite heavy in leaves, as we are doing in this moment, remember to change the color values of your leaves in order to have different levels, let's say, of leaves that you are creating, and in this way you will be able to give a little bit of depth to your composition. Some brush strokes can be bigger than others, and having different brush strokes in size will give your whole composition some more movement, but also a more realistic final effect. I have written an 18-page ebook that you can download at the link below, where I explain you how to approach a flower composition, loose style flower composition, and this book is called The Beginner's Guide to Watercolor Flower Painting. I encourage you to download it if you are into flower painting and if you want to learn more how to paint loose style flowers in watercolor. Always keep in mind that when you are painting loose style flowers, it is your composition and your final result that matters, and so you can add as many leaves as you'd like. In this case, I'd stopped in this moment because I felt I reached a quite homogeneous effect of leaves compared to the flowers that I've created, and I like how I played with the amount of leaves, with a very first layer of leaves that are very light, where the amount of pigment is not very concentrated, and where I added afterwards some more concentrated brush strokes in green, in different greens, that allow me to enjoy this whole composition and to focus on the flowers in the center. So at this point I just took a smaller brush in size 6, it's a round brush, and I'm adding the center of the flowers. For the peony, I'm using a mixture of yellow ochre, and I am creating some little dots and straight lines in the center, and I'm adding a little bit of transparent orange at a second moment to create a little bit of blend effect between the yellow ochre and the orange in some parts of the center of the peony. With this same brush, I am mixing on my color palette a little bit of Quinacridone Magenta with a little bit of yellow ochre, and I'm creating some layering effects onto the petals of this peony. I'm using basically the same pigments to create a little bit more concentrated mixture of Quinacridone Magenta and yellow ochre to start to create these layers on the petals. I also like to add a little bit of pink ink just into the center of this peony to create that contrasting blending effect that only inks are able to give. If you don't have inks, don't worry, you can just obtain the same or a very similar effect, just adding into the center a more concentrated amount of pigment that you have on your color palette. Let me know if you like this type of tutorial and if you painted along with me. Press the like button and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more tutorials in this style. Also, let me know if there is something in particular you would like to see next. See you in the next video.